Hi, my name is Susan Silbert, and I'm presenting on the Milieu Communication Training Approach. So, a little background about the approach. Its intervention is designed to elicit early communication and language behaviors in young children with a variety of developmental disabilities. Some of these disabilities could be general developmental delays, specific language delays, or autism spectrum disorders. It addresses the question, if a child is not talking, how do we get them to start? So, to answer this question, researchers drew on the strengths and weaknesses of behavioral programming. Some of the strengths were it's predictable, it has a formal structure, its use of task analysis, and attention to the antecedents and consequences of behavior. And then the weaknesses of the behavioral programming approach was it included the need to establish, we needed to establish basic communicative behavior that supports the development of speech and to generalize communicative acts beyond the training setting. So these efforts paved the way for the development of the use of natural environments and contingencies carefully manipulated to elicit spontaneous communicative acts that could be shaped towards more conventional functional language. These methods have some different names that many of you are probably familiar with, including the Mann model, milieu teaching, and incidental teaching. All of the methods share an understanding that language grows out of the desire to communicate, and communication begins with an intention to affect the thoughts or actions of another human being. So, some principles of the milieu communication training, it's training in everyday environments. You're arranging the environment to promote communication. So, an example of this is putting objects of high interest in sight but out of reach of the child. It's offering preferred toys and activities so that participation is self reinforcing. And you want to build routines that the child enjoys. Um, Another principle is encouraging spontaneous communication by using expectant waiting and refraining from prompting. Also, waiting for the child to initiate teaching episodes by gesturing or indicating interest in a desired object or activity. You want to provide prompts and cues for the expansion of the child's initiation. Finally, rewarding the child's responses with access to a desired object or activity, which is intrinsic reinforcement, as opposed to a tangible reward that's unrelated to the communication act, which is an extrinsic reinforcement. So there are two phases in this approach. The first phase is called responsivity education and prelinguistic milieu teaching. It's again naturalistic, it's child led teaching, and it's focused on first increasing the frequency and then later the sophistication of expression of intentional communication. The overall goal is to increase the number and complexity of communicative acts. Intervention contains both a parent component, so caregivers have to be trained to be highly responsive to the child's communicative behaviors, and this is the responsivity education piece, and also a direct intervention component in which the child is encouraged to use gestures, eye contact, vocalizations, and to initiate communication. It's used with children who are functioning developmentally between approximately 9 to 15 months and are at the chronological ages between 2 to 6 years old. Uh, it's appropriate for children with developmental delays who are not using gestures and vocalizations at a frequency in a way consistent with the onset of language. And as a note, the responsivity component with the caregivers is important because it helps with generalization. In the initial phase, the clinician creates opportunities for the child to become highly motivated to communicate. So, for example, the clinician might place a colorful toy on a high shelf the child can't reach without help. Or, with an example like singing Row, Row, Row Your Boat, you would sing the song if it's of high interest to the child, and maybe you'd rock back and forth singing, um, and you'd provide a small amount of time with the enjoyable activity, then withdraw the activity. So in the case of the song, you would sing one round and then stop and wait for the child to request more. Or with the ball, you would take take the ball off the shelf, have the child have some time with the enjoyable activity, and then place the ball back on the shelf. Um, and request more is the ultimate goal of what you want the child to do. You're striving for intervention activities centered on the child's interests to help ensure that there are routines the child enjoys and the child will be motivated to request. These routines, in turn, offer the opportunity for more frequent opportunities for prelinguistic expression of intentions that are the foundation for more functional communication and acquisition of conventional language. So, responsivity education and the prelinguistic milieu teaching phase provides an environment that is conducive to child engagement and the establishment of routines that serve as a context for communicative acts. These routines can incorporate typical play behaviors like pushing a toy car, throwing a ball, and more atypical ways of playing, such as tapping on metal objects, spinning toys, or vocalizing into containers. Then the interventionist will build routines based upon this play interest. So, for example, after the child might vocalize ah into a container, and then the adult will then take the container and imitate the vocalization and say ah into the container, just as the child had done. And this routine will build, and reciprocally, the adult and child will take turns and imitate each other. And once this contingent vocalization is established, then the interventionist can model something a little more complex like ah, ba. And you'll want to work towards increasing both the frequency and complexity of the child's vocalization. This type of routine building continues in this way, following the child's interests, working towards the goals of the session. Once the child is vested in these routines, time delays can assist in increasing the frequency of nonverbal vocalizations, such as ah or ba, coordinated eye gaze, use of conventional and unconventional gestures like pointing or clapping. And then eventually you can combine these components of intentional communication acts like eye gaze and pointing, or vocalization and clapping. So the first phase can be used to foster the generalization of play skills as children learn to expand routines to include other toys and objects. So phase 2, which is called the milieu language teaching, starts once the prelinguistic communication phase is frequent and fluent. It uses similar activities, so environmental arrangement, responsive interaction strategies, and contingent imitation. The main difference is now adults up the ante as to what child behaviors receive an immediate response. So during the first phase, the preverbal intentional acts like gestures, eye gaze, and vocalization would be met with an immediate positive response by the adult. In phase 2, the milieu language teaching phase, the adult holds out longer for a word or word approximation before responding to the child's intention. So, for example, with the row, row, row your boat routine, it's been established, and the child frequently requests the adult restart the routine with a gaze. And now in phase 2, the adult will now respond with a verbal prompt. So you'll sing the song and stop, and the child might do their gaze, and instead of starting again, you would stop, and the verbal prompt would be, again, you want it again. And so initially, the adult would just restart the routine after the verbal prompt was given, but over time, the clinician would use um, this expectant waiting to encourage the child to produce an approximation of the target word again. And it may initially just be a vowel, and that's fine because later you can shape it to a closer approximation of the target over time. The key principle is to avoid frustrating the child. If the child does not produce the desired act within 10 to 15 seconds, the adult should provide what the child wants, although just for a short, maybe just for a short time, then you'll try again. So the adult will also need to remember to change objects and activities when the child kind of tires of them or becomes frustrated with the current focus of the interaction. So you want to make an effort to allow the child to choose the next focus of interaction, but it's from a set of choices that are pre-selected by the adult because you've kind of prearranged the environment. So importantly, part of the lesson being taught in milieu communication training is that communication is an effectively rewarding activity. Children won't be motivated to learn to communicate if they're frustrated. The aim of the approach is to show the child that using communication brings rewards more quickly than maladaptive behaviors like banging your head against the wall or crying. The approach aims to show that the child that in interaction with other people, it's possible to obtain more enjoyable activities and more interesting objects than the child can produce on their own, and also for the child to learn that engaging others through communication provides rewarding outcomes. So thank you for listening to the presentation, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your semester.